Am I on? Oh, I am going. Good, very good. So, one of the things that I really, really love is a good story and really good storytelling. There's an art to crafting a narrative in a way that grabs a listener, you know what I mean? Draws them in and then holds their attention through the whole thing. And so I love movies and comics and books and you telling me stories. I love a good story. But one of the meanest things you can do to somebody like me who loves good stories is to tell them something about the story before they get to hear the story. Okay, so those things, those details that you find out that somebody tells you before you get to actually hear the story are called spoilers. Anybody know that? Is that just me? Okay, so can't stand spoilers. They're evil, in my opinion. I have an unreasonable hatred of spoilers because it ruins the opportunity for the listener to be surprised. You know, if they know something's coming, they expect it, and so the impact of it is lost. Even if it's not a big surprise, even if it's just a detail of the story, even if somebody says, oh, this movie is so good, you got to watch it, even that is like, well, now I'm expecting it to be great. I've seen movies before where everybody hyped it up so much, and it was so great, and then I watched it, and it was okay. And I was like, oh, I'm so disappointed, right? Because I expected this, and I got that, so I expect this. You know, it's just, I don't like spoilers. Well, all of that to say, I have to spoil a story for you maybe this morning. How many of you are familiar with the story of Jesus and Lazarus? Okay, hopefully a lot of you are. Hopefully I'm not going to ruin it for you, but I'm about to if you don't know the whole story. So are you ready? Okay, so here it is. Lazarus dies, and Jesus brings him back to life. Okay? So I hope I didn't ruin anything. Does everybody know that part? Okay, good. If you didn't know that part, sorry. There's a good reason for my doing that. Today, we are starting a new series leading up to the celebration of the resurrection called From Death to Life. And it's all based around this idea that this is the best time of year if you're a Christian. This really is the high point of our year because we know that the resurrection of Jesus is the single greatest moment in all of history. And so we want to celebrate it big as a church. And so we're going to take the next 4 weeks, or actually this week and 3 more weeks, looking at stories surrounding, leading up to and including the resurrection of Jesus, and see how God is weaving this story to impact our lives today. And it's not just a story. You have to understand when I say story, I don't necessarily mean fiction, right? You get that, right? If you tell a true story about something that happened in your life, it's a true story. So anytime you hear me say the word story, I just mean something that happened. Because we believe that this stuff is true. In fact, we're convinced it's true, so much so that we act differently because we know it's true. So today, we are going to look at the story of Jesus and Lazarus. Now, most of you know the story of Jesus and Lazarus. But do you know that it ties directly to the crucifixion of Jesus? That Lazarus being raised from the dead is a direct cause of Jesus being killed. Grab your Bible, turn to John chapter 11. If you're using the Bible from the chairs in front of you, that's page 720. Use an app, whatever works for you. And we're going to start at the end of the story. That's why I had to spoil it for you. We're going to start in verse 46. I'll give you a second to get there. Some of y'all are already reading ahead. Cheaters? Okay. So let's look at verse 46. It says, some of the Jews who witnessed it went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. Then the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the Sanhedrin. That word is Sanhedrin, if you care about Hebrew stuff. It was the lawmakers, basically. They were the people who enforced the laws. They were sort of the elites of the Jews. So, verse 48 says, what are we accomplishing, they asked. Is this man performing many miraculous signs, and if we let him go on like this, everyone will believe him, and then the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. And one of them, named Caiaphas, who was serving as the high priest that year, spoke up, said, you know nothing at all. You do not realize that it is better that one man may die for the people than for the whole nation to perish. Now this is interesting. Look at verse 51. It says, now he did not say that on his own, but as the high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the Jewish nation, and not only for that nation, but also for the scattered children of God, bringing them together to make them one. And so look at verse 53. So from that day on, they plotted to take his life. For the Pharisees, Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead was the last straw. They've had enough. They They knew that Jesus had to die. Now, to us, that seems ridiculous. I mean, if you hear about somebody raising somebody to life, wouldn't that intrigue you? Wouldn't that draw you in, want to know more? It seems from our perspective that they ought to be drawn to Jesus to at least investigate. Excuse me. Sorry about that. I should have muted it. They should at least investigate it, and if nothing else, they should want to know more, but really they ought to want to follow him. And yet that's not the conclusion they draw. You know, we hear this story and we think, oh, it's obvious, this is a good thing, but they drew all the wrong conclusions. And what we need to realize is that John, the ultimate storyteller here, is trying to get us to draw different conclusions. He wants us to see this story in a different light. And he wants us to not make the mistake that the Pharisees made and the Sanhedrin made. John includes these stories because the raising of Lazarus points directly to the resurrection of Jesus, and that is the climax of the story. And more than that, this story reveals that God has a heart for his people. By telling this story, and John being a great storyteller, he bookends with two resurrections the story. He has the resurrection of Jesus. He has all the details in between. He has the resurrection of Lazarus, all the details, then the resurrection of Jesus. And all of that is to reveal that God has a deep love for his people. And it starts right here in this story. So let's look at this story and let's figure out exactly what it says to us about Jesus. Let's see if we can draw different conclusions than the Pharisees did. Sound good? All right, so let's go back to verse 1. It says, "Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This is Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick. She was the one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, 'Lord, the one you love is sick.' And when he heard this, Jesus said, 'This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it.' And Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, and yet, when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days." Skip down to verse 17. It says, "On his arrival," so he finally leaves, takes the disciples, they arrive in Bethany. "On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. 'Lord,' Martha said, 'if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask.' And Jesus said to her, 'Your brother will rise again.' Martha answered, 'I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day.' And Jesus said to her," I love this, "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even though he dies, and whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" "Yes, Lord," she told him. "I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who has come into the world." And after she said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. "So the teacher is here," she said, "and he's asking for you." And when Mary heard this, she got up and quickly went to him. Verse 31 says, when the Jews who had been with Mary in the house comforting her noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. And when Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she also fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." And when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. And Jesus wept. And then the Jews said, "See how he loved him?" But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Now, popular Bible trivia question: what is the shortest verse in all of the Bible? Everybody knows that, right? When did you learn that? VBS, right? Sunday school, when you were 3. This is one of those very, very popular answers to the question, what's a verse in the Bible? I did a lot of church camps, and so if a kid has to recite a verse, has to memorize a verse to get into lunch, you hear that one a lot, right? And every time a kid would come up to me and say, "Oh, Jesus wept," I often ask the same question: why did Jesus weep? And most of them had no idea. Because most people don't really understand. They don't know. They may know Jesus wept is the shortest verse in the Bible, but they don't know that it comes from this story. And even if they do understand, they may not really understand the context of what's going on here. Why did Jesus weep? The people that Martha and Mary were with, they assumed that Jesus wept because he loved Lazarus. And that's probably true. We know that he loved Lazarus. But verse 33 says that he saw Martha and Mary's grief, and he saw the weeping of all those who were with them, and that moved him. That hurt him. He saw their pain, and that made him weep. Their pain caused him pain. The first thing I want us to take away from the story of Lazarus is this: God really cares about your suffering. A couple Sundays ago, I was talking to a bunch of us before we got started, and it struck me that every person I talked to was going through something pretty tough. There was all kinds of really hard things that we're dealing with, ongoing health problems and relationship struggles and financial questions and parenting issues. And a lot of us are carrying lots of very heavy burdens for the people that we love. And on the one hand, I'm really glad that we all love each other so much that we feel free to open up and share some of the burdens that we're carrying. I love that about Promise Point. Thank you guys for being those people. But on the other hand, there is a lot of hurt in our little family. We're going through some stuff, guys. Now, you may know about some other people's stuff, but you're going through some stuff too. And if you love the other people around you, you're probably carrying some of that burden for them as well, right? Every person who told me something that they were going through that was tough, I took that on because I care for them. I care about you. And thank you. You've shown me you care about me too. We carry these heavy, heavy burdens, and we're going through some tough things right now. And I bet that every one of you has something that you can point to, probably more than one thing you can point to and said, that's too much right now. It's ongoing, it's relentless, it's just tough. And you may start to question whether or not God cares. There's a real temptation when we've gone through something for a long time, or if we go through really, really big, especially for believers, to start to wonder, now wait a minute, I thought things got better if we followed Christ. Why is it so hard? Why am I suffering so much? And really, as we mature and as we grow in our understanding of God, we can really start to understand just how big God is, right? Just how grand and majestic and how much greater He is than us. And with that, sometimes can come a misunderstanding that thinks, well, He's so much greater than us. My little problems aren't really all that big. He's got bigger things to worry about than me, little old me, right? And in fact, David wrote in Psalm 8, O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory above the heavens. And when I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place, what is man that you're mindful of him? The Son of Man that you care for him. And David is just expressing what lots of us feel in our hearts, that God is too great to be concerned with the little problems that I'm going through, even if those little problems seem great to us. See, but here's the beautiful thing, and this is a truth that you just have to settle with. God really does care about you. God really does care for you, and He sees your suffering. Okay, here's another bit of Bible trivia. Anybody know the first person in the Bible to give God a name? Not what He calls Himself, but when somebody calls Him. Anybody know? So, Hagar. Hey, somebody knew it. It's a little tougher than Jesus wept, isn't it? It's Hagar, the servant of Sarah. So in Genesis chapter 16, God has promised Abraham and his wife Sarah that they're going to have a son. They're going to have children, descendants. But it hadn't happened yet, and it's been a lot of years. And so Hagar convinces Abraham to sleep. Did I get that right? Sarah convinces Abraham to sleep with Hagar so that she can produce an heir. But then when she gets pregnant, Sarah gets jealous and starts to abuse Hagar. And so Hagar runs away off into the wilderness. And while she's out there by a stream, scared to death probably, unsure of her future probably, pregnant and alone, God sends an angel to her and says, you know what? I know what you're suffering, and I promise that your son will be born. Go back to Sarah, and you're going to have so many descendants you won't ever be able to count them. And in that moment, Hagar calls God El Roi, the God who sees. When Kara died, sorry, sometimes it just hits you. When Kara died, I started to wonder if God saw me, if he was aware. And I'd go out in my backyard and I'd just look up at the sky and I'd say, you see me, right? Sorry. And I was just reminded that he is El Roi, the God who sees you. He sees your suffering. He knows. He's not unaware. He knows what you're going through. He knows the burdens you carry. He knows that the illness is wearing you down. He knows that the relationship is beating you down. And he sees you. And more than that, he cares. And more than that, he understands. One of the great prophecies about Jesus is Isaiah 53. We're going to talk about it in a couple weeks. Some of y'all immediately know what I'm talking about. It's amazing. In fact, it's so good that some people for a long time thought that the Christians had just inserted it into Isaiah because they couldn't believe that it actually was really old prophecy from hundreds and hundreds of years before Jesus was born. But today I just want to look at verse 3. This is describing Jesus. It says, he was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and familiar with suffering. Jesus is described as familiar with suffering. Familiar. Jesus doesn't just see our suffering, he understands it. In fact, I'm convinced that one of the reasons the Father sent the Son is so that we would know that he understands what it means to suffer. For God, our suffering isn't just an academic idea. It's not just this abstract thing. He felt pain. He suffered with us. And not just the cross. He suffered isolation. He suffered loss. He suffered rejection. He suffered hunger. He said, I have no place to lay my head. He suffered poverty and want. He suffered. So he understands your suffering because for him, your suffering is a real, personal, tangible thing. When I said that short verse, Jesus wept, that was Bible trivia, but I lied. There's nothing trivial about that verse. God sees us when we hurt, and he cares about it, and he understands, and he weeps with us. It doesn't matter what the suffering is. Listen, sometimes we can think that, well, if I look at my suffering and then I really get serious and honest and I compare it to other people's suffering, I really have nothing to complain about. I do that a lot. And sometimes it's a good thing. Sometimes it gives you perspective to say, how bad do you really have it? I've got a roof over my head. I've got more than I could possibly want. Clearly, I've never gone hungry. I am enjoying my life. Really? But it doesn't matter. Guys, it doesn't matter how your suffering stacks up against anybody else's because all suffering is relative. Whatever you're going through, it's real for you. It's relative to your previous suffering, what you've experienced before. So maybe this is the worst thing you've ever gone through. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's just relative to what you've gone through recently. Maybe this one little thing isn't really all that bad from an outsider's perspective, but for you, it's the final straw. This one little thing is just one thing too many. God sees that. See, all suffering is relative because whatever hurts you, hurts you. And God knows, and he cares. So what do we do when we're suffering? When we who are Christians, who are followers of Jesus, know that he is good, and yet we find ourselves in those times of difficulty, those times of pressure, those times where we're just beat down by it all, what do we do? Well, I think we can find three answers from this. First thing is go to Jesus. A lot of people will suffer, and they will use that as an excuse to run from Jesus. And some people will run from him permanently and even deny that he exists because they're suffering. But you and I have to run to Jesus. The whole idea is we've got to take our suffering to him. We got to let our suffering drive us to him. We got to do what Martha and Mary both did when they went out and they told him what he already knew. Sometimes when we're suffering, we don't think we need to talk about that with God. Sometimes we forget that he cares about it, and we think, yeah, he already knows what I'm going through. I don't need to talk about it. But we really ought to look what Mary and Martha did. They went and they told Jesus what they were suffering through. He already knew about it, but they still told him, if you had only been here. What Mary and Martha did was called lament. They told him how much it hurt that he didn't take away the problem. They told him how much it destroyed them, that he could have done something, and he stayed away. And they told him. They carry that heavy burden to him. See, I know that most of us are willing to pray about the big things in our life. We're willing to go to God and say, look, I need you to fix this. I need you to fix this. Please solve this problem for me, or please take away this illness, or whatever it is. But I don't know how many of us are willing to go to God and say, look, I don't know why you're not fixing this. I don't understand why I'm going through it. You have the power to do something about this, and it doesn't seem like you are doing anything. We don't know why we keep praying for those people that we love to come to Jesus and surrender their lives to him, and that hadn't happened yet. We don't understand why our marriages are in trouble, or why our children are in rebellion. We don't understand why he hasn't healed our bodies. We don't understand why we keep fighting these same battles over and over and over again. And we're frustrated that he's not fixing it. Let me tell you, tell him that. Go tell him how sad you are and how frustrated you are and how you don't understand. Go tell him. He already knows, and let me promise you something. He can handle it. He can take your frustration. He can take your lament. In fact, he wants you to pour out your heart to him, because in the pouring out of your heart to him, you're coming to him. And that's the goal. That's all he wants. He just wants to be with you. I promise you, he wants you to be honest about your suffering. The second thing we can do when we're suffering is to do something that I think is maybe even harder than lament, and that's this: worship him. Exalting God back to his proper place in our perspective and in our hearts is exactly what we need when those moments are so hard for us. And when Kara was in that hospital for that whole year, I heard a preacher say something that was so profound, and it stuck with me, and I want to share it with you. Right now is the only time in all of eternity when we get to suffer in the midst of pain. We get to worship in the midst of pain. The only time in all of eternity where we get to worship despite our suffering. Now, someday Jesus is going to come back, and all suffering is going to end. And we are going to worship him like we have never worshiped him before, and I am really looking forward to that. But right now, we get to do something that won't ever exist after. Right now, we get to sacrifice in worship to God, even though it doesn't feel good. I know that's huge, but it's huge. The third thing we can do, best of all, when you're suffering, remember that Jesus has a plan. Okay? Remember, he's got a plan. Remember that he told the disciples, even before they went to Bethany, this sickness will not end in death. He told them, he says this: it is for God's glory that God's Son may be glorified through it. You understand? He knew what he was going to do with Lazarus. He understood what was coming. And yet, he tarried because he had a greater, bigger plan. He understood Lazarus was sick. He understood that Lazarus was suffering. He understood that while he was sick and suffering, in Bethany, Mary and Martha were also suffering because they were not only hurting for their friend, their brother, their loved one who is in pain, but also they were afraid that it wouldn't fix, it wouldn't solve. And then when he died, he understood their suffering. But he had a bigger plan. He had a bigger plan. Their suffering was for a reason. Now listen, I need you to understand this. God did not send their suffering so that he could do something great. But sometimes he allows suffering so that he can be glorified. So we have to remember that he has a bigger plan. Mary, Martha, Lazarus, all those Jews with them had no idea what God was planning, but Jesus did. And more than that, he understood that he was going to raise Lazarus, and that was going to be great, except that it was going to irritate and push the Pharisees over the edge, and that was going to lead them to want to kill him. And that was going to lead him to the cross, and that was going to lead him to the empty tomb and our salvation. There's a plan. Remember what Jesus told Martha. I am the resurrection and the life. I am life. I have it in my control. Because that's the biggest thing we got to get. He is absolutely in control of all of it. And sometimes we think in the suffering, well, if you're absolutely in control, why aren't you fixing this? But sometimes you have to remember, if you're absolutely in control, how are you using this? Because he's got a great plan. Look at verse 38. It says, Jesus once more, deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. And he said, take away the stone. But Lord, Martha said, the sister of the dead man, by this time there's a bad odor. He's been there for 4 days. And then Jesus says, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? And so they took the stone away, and Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me, and I knew that you always hear me. But I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. And when he had said this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. And the dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped in strips of linen, cloth around his face. And Jesus said, take off the grave clothes and let him go. And therefore, many Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did put their faith in him. The story of the resurrection of Lazarus points directly to the story of the resurrection of Jesus. This is great storytelling on John's part. Lazarus is the inciting event, and the resurrection of Jesus, the empty tomb, is the climax. And all points in between point to the sovereignty and the goodness of God. All of the things that we are going to read in the next few weeks are the loud voice saying that death, even death, is under the authority of Jesus Christ. So we need to hold these two truths simultaneously. We need to grab onto both and hold them together. God really, really cares about your suffering. And God really, really is sovereign over all of it and can do anything. And when we hold those two things together, he loves us and cares, and he is powerful and has all authority. Because it's not just about our earthly suffering that he cares. He cares about our deepest suffering. He cares about the suffering of the world that is all of our sin that separates us from him. He cares so much that he was willing to come, be attacked, be falsely accused, be unjustly judged, maliciously judged, cruelly murdered, and then triumphantly raised to life so that you and I could have life. He cares about the suffering that's greater than now. He cares about eternal. And so he's willing to do everything so that we can no longer suffer and we can be with him and we can have that moment when he comes back and we can worship him with no suffering for forever. He cares so much that he was willing to do everything for you. Will you pray with me? God, it is really hard in the midst of suffering to remember your goodness. And our brains tell us you're good, but our hearts tell us otherwise. And I know that in our little family, there's a lot of suffering. And some of us are willing to open up and be honest about it with others, but Some of us are trying to hold it all together, and we're trying to, just endure and wait for it to fix. And we're asking you to fix it, but we're not actually going to you with our lament. And we're not going to our brothers and sisters to let them carry some of the burden. So God, would you open up our hearts to the reality that you are good in the midst of our suffering, and you do care about what we're going through, and that one of the ways that you care for us is through other people. God, give us the courage to lament. Because when we lament, we get it off of our chest, then the comfort comes. And when the comfort comes, then the thanksgiving comes. And when the thanksgiving comes, then the worship comes. God, please use our suffering to draw us back to you and to exalt you and worship you for the good God that you are. And that we know, we have confidence that these are stories, but they're true stories, and that you are for us and you are returning for us. And because of the resurrection, we now have life. And as you said, life abundantly. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.